The Barbary Wars were a series of two conflicts fought between the United States and the North African Barbary states, Tripoli, Algiers, Tunis, and Morocco. For decades, these states operated as pirates, seizing merchant ships and enslaving crews unless nations paid a tribute, or protection money. While the U.S. initially paid, President Thomas Jefferson eventually refused to meet the escalating demands, leading to the First Barbary War in 1801. The conflict saw the birth of American naval legends and the first-ever U.S. military victory on foreign soil. After a brief second conflict in 1815, the U.S. finally ended the practice of paying tribute. These wars were pivotal in establishing the U.S. Navy and the Marine Corps as a global force.
Part 1. The Price of American Honor. In the late 1700s, the American people were full of hope. The American Revolution was over, and a new American nation had been born. For the first time, American merchants and American sailors could look at the vast blue ocean not as a barrier, but as a highway to wealth. American ships were filled with timber, grain, and tobacco, ready to be traded in the busy ports of Europe and the Mediterranean. But there was a dark shadow looming over these American dreams. For centuries, the waters of the Mediterranean Sea had been controlled by the Barbary states, Tripoli, Tunis, Algiers, and Morocco. These states were home to the Barbary pirates, or corsairs. These were not the pirates you see in movies with wooden legs and parrots. These were organized, state-sponsored navies. Their job was simple: capture any ship that did not pay tribute to their leaders. When the American colonies were still part of the British Empire, they were protected by the powerful British Royal Navy. But once the American people won their independence, that protection disappeared. Suddenly, every American ship was a target. Every American sailor was in danger. The American flag, which represented freedom at home, was seen as a sign of weakness on the high seas. The trouble truly began in 1784. An American ship called the Betsy was captured by Moroccan pirates. Not long after, more American ships were seized by Algiers. The American sailors were taken off their ships, stripped of their belongings, and sold into slavery. Some were forced to work in the scorching sun, building fortifications for the very people who had kidnapped them. Others were held in dark, damp dungeons, waiting for the American government to pay a ransom. The American people were horrified. These were American citizens, fathers, sons, and brothers, being held captive thousands of miles away. In the streets of Philadelphia and Boston, the American public began to demand action. They didn't want to see the American flag insulted. They didn't want to see American blood spilled. However, the young American government was broke. The American military was almost non-existent. At that time, many American leaders believed it was cheaper to just pay the pirates. They called it tribute. It was essentially protection money. The American government would send gold, jewelry, and even modern warships to the Barbary leaders just so they would promise not to attack American ships. Inside the American government, a huge debate began. On one side was John Adams. He believed that the American nation was too young and too poor to fight a war across the Atlantic Ocean. He argued that the American people should just pay the tribute and move on. He thought it was the practical choice for a new American republic. On the other side was Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson had a different vision for the American future. He believed that paying tribute was a never-ending trap. He argued that if the American government paid one pirate, another would just ask for more. He believed that the only way to earn respect for the American flag was through strength, not gold. He famously said that the American people should build a navy and deliver their own justice. For a while, the American government followed the path of Adams. We paid millions of dollars. We sent beautiful American-made gifts to the leaders of Algiers and Tripoli. But Jefferson was right. The demands never stopped.
The more the American government gave, the more the Barbary leaders wanted. They saw the American payments as a sign of American fear. By 1794, the American Congress had finally had enough. They passed the Naval Act, which authorized the building of 6 powerful American frigates. These were not ordinary ships. They were designed by the best American engineers to be faster and stronger than anything the pirates had. Ships like the U.S.S. Constitution, the U.S.S. United States, and the U.S.S. Constellation began to take shape in American shipyards. These ships were the pride of the American people. They were built with American oak and manned by American sailors who were eager to defend their country's honor. In 1801, Thomas Jefferson became the American president. Immediately, he was tested. The Pasha of Tripoli, Yusuf Karamanli, decided that the American tribute wasn't high enough. He demanded a massive new payment of $225,000. When the American government refused, the Pasha did something unthinkable. He ordered his men to cut down the flagpole at the American consulate in Tripoli. This was a declaration of war against the American people. President Jefferson didn't wait for a formal declaration from Congress. He knew that American interests were under attack. He ordered a squadron of American ships to sail across the Atlantic. This was a massive undertaking. In those days, there were no radios or GPS. Once those American ships left the American coast, they were on their own. They had to carry all their own food, water, and gunpowder. The American fleet arrived in the Mediterranean in the summer of 1801. When the people of the Barbary states saw the American frigates, they were surprised. They expected more gold. Instead, they saw American cannons. The early months of the war were a game of mouse and cat. The American ships tried to blockade the port of Tripoli, stopping any ships from going in or out. The American sailors were brave, but they were fighting in unfamiliar waters. The coastline was full of hidden rocks and dangerous shallow waters. The American captains had to be careful not to crash their expensive American ships. One of the early major victories for the American side happened when the U.S.S. Enterprise, a small but fast American schooner, encountered a Tripolitan ship. The American crew fought with incredible skill. They hammered the enemy ship with cannon fire until the pirates surrendered. Not a single American life was lost in the battle. When the news reached home, the American people cheered. It was proof that an American ship could defeat the pirates in a fair fight. But the war was far from over. The Pasha of Tripoli was stubborn. He had plenty of American prisoners, and he knew the American government cared about them. He used these American lives as bargaining chips. The American blockade was working, but it wasn't enough to end the war. The American commanders realized that they couldn't just sit in the ocean and watch. They had to take the fight to the enemy. They had to show the world that the American spirit could not be broken by pirates or kings. As the year 1803 approached, the American Navy prepared for a much more aggressive campaign. Little did they know, they were about to face their darkest hour and their greatest moment of heroism. The American flag was now flying in the Mediterranean, but the hardest battles were still to come. The American sailors looked toward the horizon, knowing that the fate of American commerce and the safety of every American citizen depended on the cannons of their ships and the courage in their hearts.
The Barbary Wars, Part 2. The darkest day for the American Navy. By 1803, the American people were getting impatient. The American Navy had been in the Mediterranean for 2 years, but the Pasha of Tripoli was still refusing to give in. To end the war, the American government sent a new commander, Commodore Edward Preble. Preble was a tough, no-nonsense American officer who believed in using every American cannon at his disposal. He took command of the legendary American frigate, the U.S.S. Constitution. However, just as the American fleet was gaining momentum, disaster struck. It was an event that would shake the American government to its core. The USS Philadelphia,
one of the most powerful and beautiful American ships in the fleet, was patrolling the waters just outside the harbor of Tripoli. Its job was to make sure no supplies reached the Pasha. The American captain, William Bainbridge, was eager to catch a pirate ship. In the heat of the chase, the Philadelphia sailed too close to the shore. Suddenly, there was a terrifying sound of wood grinding against rock. The great American ship had run aground on a hidden reef. The American sailors did everything they could to save their ship. They threw heavy cannons overboard to make the ship lighter. They cut down the masts. They pumped out water. But the American ship wouldn't budge. As the tide went out, the Philadelphia tilted to one side, leaving its remaining American cannons pointing uselessly at the sky. The Tripolitan pirates didn't waste any time. They swarmed the helpless American ship with dozens of small boats. The American crew tried to fight back, but they were trapped. Captain Bainbridge had no choice but to surrender to save his men. Over 300 American sailors were taken captive. They were marched through the streets of Tripoli in a humiliating parade. The Pasha was overjoyed. He now had a massive American warship and hundreds of American prisoners to use as shields. He threw the American officers into a cold stone castle and put the American sailors to work as slaves. Back in the United States, the news was a devastating blow. The American people felt the pain of their captured brothers. To make matters worse, the pirates managed to get the Philadelphia off the rocks. They towed the American ship into the harbor, put the American flag upside down, and prepared to use the American ship's own guns against the American fleet. Commodore Preble knew he couldn't leave the Philadelphia in the hands of the enemy. If the pirates used that American ship, they could destroy the entire American blockade. But the harbor was guarded by 100 cannons on the shore and dozens of pirate boats. A direct American attack would be suicide. A young American lieutenant named Stephen Decatur stepped forward with a plan. He was only 25 years old, but he had the heart of a lion. He suggested a secret American night raid. Decatur and a small group of American volunteers climbed aboard a captured pirate ship that they renamed the U.S.S. Intrepid. They disguised themselves as Maltese sailors. Under the cover of a dark, moonless night in February 1804, the small American boat drifted slowly into the Tripoli harbor. As they got closer to the Philadelphia, a pirate guard shouted at them. An American sailor who spoke the local language shouted back, saying they had lost their anchors in a storm and needed to tie up next to the big ship. The pirates believed the lie. The moment the American boat touched the side of the Philadelphia, Decatur yelled the order, "Board!" The American sailors exploded onto the deck of the Philadelphia. They didn't use guns because the noise would alert the shore batteries. Instead, they used American swords and pikes. The fighting was fast and fierce. The pirates, surprised by the American ferocity, were either cut down or jumped overboard into the cold water. In less than 20 minutes, the American team had cleared the deck. But they couldn't take the ship back. It was too damaged and stuck. Decatur had orders to destroy it. The American sailors began lugging barrels of gunpowder and bundles of wood into the belly of the ship. They set the fires and waited until the last possible second to jump back onto the Intrepid. As the American sailors rowed away as fast as they could, the Philadelphia erupted in a massive ball of fire. The flames rose hundreds of feet into the air, lighting up the entire city of Tripoli. The American cannons on the burning ship began to cook off from the heat, firing randomly into the Pasha's castle. The American raid was a total success. Not a single American life was lost. Even the famous British Admiral Lord Nelson called it the most bold and daring act of the age. Stephen Decatur became the first great American hero of the 19th century. The American flag had been avenged. Even though the ship was gone, the American prisoners were still in the Pasha's dungeon. Commodore Preble decided it was time to turn up the heat. Throughout the summer of 1804, the American fleet launched 5 separate attacks on Tripoli. American gunboats sailed right into the harbor, trading shots with the pirate fleet at point-blank range. In these fights, Stephen Decatur once again showed his American courage. In one fight, after his brother was wounded by a pirate, Decatur boarded the enemy boat almost alone and fought the pirate captain in a desperate hand-to-hand struggle. He won, proving to the world that an American sailor would never back down. Even though the American bravery, the Pasha still wouldn't surrender. He sat behind his thick stone walls and laughed at the American shells. He believed the American government would eventually get tired and go home. He didn't realize how stubborn the American spirit could be. While the American Navy was fighting at sea, an American diplomat named William Eaton was thinking of a different way to win. Eaton was a former American soldier with a wild idea. He knew that the Pasha, Yusuf Karamanli, had an older brother named Hamet who had been kicked out of the country. Eaton believed that if the American government helped Hamet take back his throne, the new leader would be an American ally and end the war. President Jefferson gave Eaton permission to try. Eaton traveled to Egypt and found Hamet living among the ruins of the desert. He convinced Hamet to join forces with the American cause. American diplomat William Eaton gathered a tiny group of 7 American Marines and a few hundred mercenaries from all over the world. Their goal was to march 600 miles across the brutal Libyan desert to capture the city of Derna. It was a journey that everyone said was impossible. No American had ever tried to lead an army across such a wasteland. The march was a nightmare. The American-led group faced sandstorms, lack of water, and constant arguments between the different groups of soldiers. Many times the mercenaries threatened to quit or kill the Americans. But William Eaton and his small band of American Marines refused to give up. They kept the American flag moving forward, 1 mile at a time, through the burning heat. They were hungry, they were thirsty, and they were exhausted, but they were driven by the American promise of victory. They knew that if they could reach Derna, they could put enough pressure on the Pasha to finally free the American prisoners in Tripoli. As the year 1805 began, this small American-led army emerged from the desert, tired but ready to fight. They could see the blue waters of the Mediterranean again. On the horizon, they saw the sails of American warships waiting to support them. The stage was set for the final act of the war. The American Navy was at the gates, and an American army was at the back door. The Pasha of Tripoli was about to learn that the American people would go to the ends of the earth to protect their freedom.
The Barbary Wars, Part 3. The year was 1805. After marching for 50 days and 600 miles across the burning sands of North Africa, the small American-led army finally reached the outskirts of Derna. This was a major city under the control of the Pasha of Tripoli. Leading the charge was the American diplomat William Eaton and a handful of brave American Marines under Lieutenant Presley O'Bannon. These men were exhausted. Their boots were falling apart. Their skin was blistered by the sun. But when they saw the blue waters of the Mediterranean Sea and the white walls of Derna, their American spirit caught fire. They weren't just fighting for land. They were fighting to free the American sailors still locked in the Pasha's dungeons in Tripoli. On April 27, 1805, the American attack began. Out in the harbor, 3 American warships, the Argus, the Hornet, and the Nautilus, began to rain cannon fire down on the city's defenses. The sound of American cannons echoing off the desert hills was like music to Eaton's ears. While the American ships pounded the fortress, Eaton and his American Marines led a daring ground assault. The fighting was intense. Bullets whizzed through the air. At one point, Eaton was shot in the wrist, but he didn't stop. He pushed forward, cheering on his men.
The American Marines charged into the heart of the enemy defenses with their bayonets fixed. In a moment that would be remembered forever in American history, Lieutenant O'Bannon and his American Marines fought their way to the top of the governor's palace. They tore down the enemy flag and raised the American stars and stripes. It was the first time the American flag had ever been raised over a conquered city in the Eastern Hemisphere. This incredible moment is why the Marine Corps hymn still mentions the shores of Tripoli to this very day. The victory at Derna sent shockwaves through the region. The Pasha of Tripoli, who had been so arrogant and demanding, was now terrified. He realized that the American government wasn't just sending ships, they were sending men who could march across deserts and take his cities. He feared that the American-led army would keep marching all the way to his palace in Tripoli. Suddenly, the Pasha wanted to talk. An American negotiator named Tobias Lear was sent to work out a peace treaty. In June 1805, a deal was struck. The Pasha agreed to stop attacking American ships and released the 300 American prisoners from the USS Philadelphia. However, the peace came with a cost. The American government agreed to pay $60,000 as a final ransom for the prisoners. This made many American people back home very angry. They felt that after all the American blood that had been spilled, the American government shouldn't have to pay a single penny to a pirate. William Eaton was especially furious. He felt the American government had abandoned the mission just when they were about to win a total victory. Despite the frustration, the First Barbary War was over. The American sailors came home to a hero's welcome. For a few years, American ships could sail the Mediterranean in peace. The American flag was finally respected by the leaders of North Africa. But the peace didn't last forever. In 1812, the United States became locked in a massive war with Great Britain. This was the War of 1812. Because the American Navy had to focus all its strength on fighting the British, there were no American warships left to patrol the Mediterranean. The Barbary leaders, especially the Dey of Algiers, saw this as an opportunity. He thought the American nation was too busy and too weak to fight back. He began capturing American merchant ships again, throwing American sailors into chains and demanding new tributes. He mocked the American government, believing the American era in the Mediterranean was over. He was wrong. He didn't realize that the War of 1812 had turned the American Navy into a world-class fighting force. By the time the war with Britain ended in 1815, the American Navy had more ships, better trained officers, and a population that was tired of being bullied. President James Madison had no patience for the pirates. He asked the American Congress for a formal declaration of war against Algiers. As soon as the ink was dry, the American government dispatched 2 powerful squadrons to the Mediterranean. The leader of the main American fleet was none other than Stephen Decatur, the man who had burned the Philadelphia years earlier. He was now a high-ranking American commodore, and he was looking for a fight. He sailed into the Mediterranean with a massive force, including some of the most powerful American warships ever built. In June 1815, the American fleet encountered the flagship of the Algerian Navy, the Meshuda. The American ships surrounded the pirate vessel and hammered it with accurate American cannon fire. Within minutes, the Algerian admiral was dead, and the ship surrendered. Decatur didn't stop there. He captured another enemy ship and then sailed straight into the harbor of Algiers. Decatur didn't want to talk for weeks or months. He gave the Dey of Algiers an ultimatum. He demanded the immediate release of all American prisoners, an end to all tribute payments forever, and a payment of $10,000 for the American ships that had been stolen. When the Algerian leader tried to negotiate, Decatur told him that the only thing he would negotiate with was American gunpowder. He stood on the deck of his American flagship, looking at the city with his cannons ready. The Dey looked at the massive American fleet and realized he had no choice. He signed the treaty right there on Decatur's American ship. Decatur didn't stop with Algiers. He took his American fleet to Tunis and then to Tripoli. At each port, he demanded that the leaders pay back the American government for the trouble they had caused. Because of the sheer power of the American Navy, every single one of them agreed. This was the end of the Barbary threat for the American people. For the first time in centuries, the pirate system of the Mediterranean was broken. The American victory was so complete that European nations soon followed the American example and stopped paying tribute themselves. The American success in the Barbary Wars changed everything. It proved to the world that the United States was a major power. It showed that the American flag represented a nation that would fight for its rights and its citizens, no matter how far away they were. The Barbary Wars were the growing pains of the American Republic. Through these conflicts, the American Navy was transformed from a small collection of ships into a legendary force. The American Marines proved their bravery on the world stage, earning a reputation that lasts to this day. Names like Stephen Decatur, William Eaton, and Presley O'Bannon became household names in the American home. They represented the American values of courage, determination, and honor. When you hear the national anthem or see the American flag flying over a ship today, you are seeing the legacy of those early American sailors and Marines. They refused to pay for peace. They chose to fight for it. Because of their sacrifice, the American people could finally look at the ocean not as a place of fear, but as a place of freedom. The story of the Barbary Wars is the story of how a young American nation found its voice and its strength. It is the story of how the American people decided that their freedom was not for sale. From the burning decks of the Philadelphia to the sandy shores of Tripoli, the American spirit shined bright, lighting the way for a future where the American flag would be a symbol of liberty across the entire globe.